They grin at you, take your money, stamp your passport, and hope you have a good time. But that warmth doesn't necessarily last past the date you check out. Many countries seem friendly to black tourists, but living there as a black person might be completely different. And that's the uncomfortable fact that this video talks about. We takes you to 10 countries that are safe to visit but hard to live in as a black person. This isn't a vacation book with a lot of beaches and keywords. It's an in-depth look at what happens when vacation ends and real life begins. Housing doors slowly close, career opportunities dwindle, and friendly interest becomes into everyday exclusion. This list shows trends that black expats go through abroad that don't usually make it into the brochure. Pay close attention, be curious, and be sure to like, subscribe, and comment since honest conversations are the first step to informed travel. 10. The United Arab Emirates. Everything shines on the outside. The airports shine, the hotels feel like they belong in the future, and the Dubai skyline appears like it was made by a software firm with unlimited money. As a tourist, the UAE can seem smooth, quick, and quite safe. You are greeted, photographed, served, and sent home with a great impression. But as soon as you stop being a tourist and try to live there, the mood changes. For many black citizens, notably migrants from Africa and portions of the Caribbean, daily life runs under a radically different rulebook. The backbone of the UAE's workforce is migrant labor, and much of it is managed by the Kafala labor sponsorship system, a framework long condemned by human rights organizations. Human Rights Watch has defined it plainly as an inherently exploitative structure that provides companies considerable control over workers. That control may be quite genuine. Workers have experienced passport confiscation, delayed or unpaid wages, and contracts being modified after arrival. One Kenyan domestic worker told Amnesty International, "When I asked for my salary, my employer said, 'You can go back to Kenya if you don't like it.' But I didn't even have my passport." That's not a vacation problem. That's a life problem. Quote. Now, here's the painful irony. Many of the individuals cleaning the hotel rooms, driving the taxis, guarding luxury properties, and erecting those iconic structures are black or brown migrants. Yet, social mobility remains strictly constrained. You can live in the UAE for decades and still never qualify for permanent residency or citizenship. Long-term belonging is not part of the arrangement. And let's talk race. Quietly, but honestly, while the UAE typically promotes itself as cosmopolitan, social hierarchy is impossible to miss. Western passports often unlock doors. African passports often raise questions. Black professionals have remarked about being mistaken for service people regardless of their employment. One Nigerian expat told The Guardian, "You're invisible until you're needed and hyper-V visible when you don't fit the image." Quote. To be clear, this isn't everyone's experience, but it's prevalent enough to be reported repeatedly. According to the International Labour Organization, migrant workers in the Gulf are disproportionately susceptible to pay theft and contract abuse, with low-income workers most affected. So yeah, the UAE is safe to visit, extremely safe. But living there can feel like existing on borrowed permission. Productive, tolerated, and replaceable. The lights are bright, the regulations are rigorous, and the welcome has an expiration date. Number 9, Italy. Italy knows how to seduce you. The food flirts, the history flexes, and the streets feel like an open-air museum. As a visitor, especially a short-term one, Italy can feel warm, energetic, and effortlessly appealing. Smiles come easy, discussions flow, and nobody seems to worry where you're from as long as you're passing through with a camera and a credit card. Living there as a black person, however, is where the postcard starts to peel. Italy has one of the highest rates of documented racist attacks against people of African heritage in Western Europe. According to Italy's National Office Against Racial Discrimination, UNAR, thousands of discrimination complaints are made each year, with housing and employment leading the list. And those are just the reported cases. Many go unfiled because basically people cease expecting anything to change. Housing is where reality hits fast. Black residents and migrants frequently describe being informed an apartment is already taken only to see it relisted days later. A Senegalese resident questioned by Al-Azhar put it straight. They claim the house is gone, but when my Italian friend phones, suddenly it's available. That's not cultural misunderstanding. That's a system quietly working against you. Then there's public life. Italy has suffered for years with casual racism that's typically disregarded as jokes or custom. Even high-profile black Italians aren't spared. Former football player Mario Balotelli recently declared, "I am Italian, but for many people here, I will never really be Italian." Quote. That feeling echoes across workplaces, schools, and public settings where blackness is often seen as permanently foreign. Institutionally, things haven't improved much. Amnesty International has condemned Italy for failing to appropriately handle racial profiling and hate crimes, claiming that racism against migrants and persons of African heritage has become increasingly acceptable in governmental and public discourse. Translation not needed. That statement already speaks for itself. And while Italy relies heavily on foreign labor, from agriculture to caring, civil society groups that help migrants have experienced rising political pressure and funding cuts. The message feels conflicting. Work is welcome, presence is permitted, but belonging is optional. So yeah, Italy is gorgeous, safe to visit, a wonderful vacation. But living there as a black person often means navigating courteous smiles layered over structural impediments. You're welcome at the table. Just don't anticipate a permanent seat. Number 8, Greece. Greece is the kind of place that sells itself effortlessly. Blue and white villages, postcard sunsets, old ruins, and beaches that look edited in real life. As a guest, Greece feels peaceful, inviting, and blissfully distant from the world's concerns. You eat healthily, move freely, and feel secure exploring late into the night. But after the vacation glow fades and real life begins, especially for black residents and migrants, the environment can shift in ways the travel brochures never disclose. Human rights groups have been sounding the alarm for years. Greece has seen a recorded rise in racial violence and antagonism toward migrants and refugees, many of whom are black and African. According to the Racist Violence Recording Network, Greece constantly records dozens of racially motivated incidents each year, ranging from verbal harassment to violent assaults. And those are merely the cases that actually get reported. One Congolese asylum seeker told The Guardian, "People shout at you on the street, spit near you, tell you to go back where you came from. After a while, you stop feeling human." That's a long way from Mediterranean hospitality. Quote. The problem isn't simply street-level animosity. Noses like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have condemned Greek authorities for failing to appropriately protect migrants and for normalizing strong anti-migrant tactics. Amnesty stated that racist violence and hate speech have been allowed to fester in a climate of impunity. When accountability is optional, behavior tends to increase. Daily living might be extremely hazardous for black persons attempting to work or rent homes. Migrants report being stuck into low-paying occupations with no legal protection. While black professionals sometimes confront suspicion about their skills, social mobility occurs, but it's narrow and often hampered by implicit expectations about who belongs. And then there's the political climate. Periods of economic distress have spurred nationalist rhetoric, and migrants are frequently presented as the problem rather than people navigating the aftermath. A Nigerian resident interviewed by Al-Azhar expressed it rather clearly. When times are good, you're invisible. When times are hard, suddenly you're the reason. To be fair, many Greeks are nice, sympathetic, and openly opposed to bigotry. Civil society groups undertake meaningful work on the ground, but living in Greece as a black person frequently means counting on pockets of benevolence while navigating systems that don't entirely protect you. So sure, Greece is lovely, safe to visit, simple to fall in love with for 2 weeks. But living there can entail always looking over your shoulder. Not because of criminality, but because membership is fragile, precarious, and never guaranteed. Number 7, Czech Republic. Prague knows how to perform. The city is clean, old, inexpensive by Western European standards, and exceedingly visitor-friendly. Visitors enthuse about safety, beer prices, and fairy tale architecture. For a brief trip, the Czech Republic feels pleasant and efficient. But walk outside the tourist bubble, especially if you're black and planning to live there, and the encounter often changes tone. Black expats in the Czech Republic routinely experience social isolation and mild but persistent professional prejudice. It's rarely loud or dramatic. It's quiet, systematic, and taxing. According to the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, people of African heritage across the EU are substantially more likely to be underemployed, overqualified for their occupations, or excluded from certain industries outright. And Czechia ranks among countries where prejudice is frequently underreported, not absent. One black professional interviewed by Reuters characterized life in Central Europe like way. People don't insult you to your face. They just don't hire you, don't promote you, and don't let you in. That sentence alone explains why living there can feel lonelier than planned. Housing is another reoccurring concern. Black residents describe landlords rejecting viewings or abruptly finding another tenant once they show up in person. A Nigerian expat told DW, "Emails are friendly, phone calls are fine, but once they see me, the apartment is suddenly gone." It's discrimination without witnesses, efficient, deniable, and deeply frustrating. Social life can be just as rigid. Outside international circles, Czech society is relatively homogeneous, and being visibly different often means being permanently foreign. Even long-term residents fluent in Czech report being treated as outsiders years later. One black resident quoted by The Guardian said, "I've lived here 8 years. People still ask me when I'm going home." Quote, "That question hits differently when this is home." To be fair, Prague has grown more international and younger generations tend to be more open. But step beyond major cities, intolerance drops fast. The FRA has noted that many victims of racial discrimination in Central and Eastern Europe don't report incidents because they don't trust authorities will act. When accountability is optional, exclusion becomes normalized. So, yes, the Czech Republic is safe to visit. Charming, affordable, easy to love for a weekend, but living there as a black person can mean navigating polite distance, stalled careers, and social walls that never quite come down. You're welcome to admire the city, just don't be surprised if it never fully lets you in. Number 6, Hungary. Hungary looks calm on arrival. Clean streets, orderly public transport, historic squares, and tourist routes that feel controlled and safe. As a visitor, especially on a guided trip or short stay, it's easy to think, what's the problem here? Nothing screams danger. Nothing feels hostile. And that's exactly how the disconnect starts. Because living in Hungary as a black person is rarely about dramatic confrontations. It's about atmosphere, policy, and persistence. For years, international monitoring bodies have warned about Hungary's hardline stance on migrants and minorities. The European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, ECRI, noted that racist and xenophobic rhetoric has become increasingly prevalent in public discourse, particularly toward people perceived as non-European. That rhetoric doesn't stay in parliament. It trickles down into daily life. Black residents report being stared at, avoided, or treated with suspicion in shops and workplaces. One African student told Deutsche, "Well, people don't shout at you. They just act like you shouldn't be there." Quiet exclusion doesn't make headlines, but it wears people down. Employment is another pressure point. Black professionals often describe being overqualified yet underutilized, while others are steered toward low-paying roles regardless of education. According to the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA, people of African descent across Central Europe experience higher rates of job discrimination and are far less likely to report it, largely due to lack of trust in institutions. In Hungary, legal protections exist on paper, but enforcement is widely seen as weak. Then there's housing. Landlords have been reported to reject tenants based on nationality or appearance, often without explanation. A Nigerian resident interviewed by The Guardian said, "They don't say no directly, they just stop responding." Quote, "That silence sends a very clear message." What makes Hungary particularly challenging is how normalized this environment has become. When political leaders frame diversity as a threat, social acceptance shrinks. Amnesty International has warned that government-led campaigns have fostered intolerance and stigmatization of migrants and minorities. Living under that narrative means constantly feeling like you're being tolerated, not welcomed. To be clear, Hungary is not unsafe for tourists. You can visit, explore, and leave with beautiful photos and no problems at all. But staying long-term as a black person often means navigating closed doors, limited upward mobility, and a social climate that doesn't want to adjust to your presence. Hungary may let you pass through comfortably. Living there, though, can feel like waiting for acceptance that was never promised and may never come. We're halfway through the countdown. If you are enjoying the video so far, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more informative content. Let's get back into it. Number 5, Poland. Poland can feel refreshingly straightforward at first. Cities are clean, public transport works, tourist zones are safe, and business visitors are often impressed by how fast things move. Short stays usually go smoothly. You show up, spend money, do your meetings, enjoy the old towns, and leave thinking that wasn't bad at all. Living there as a black person, though, introduces a very different set of rules, most of them unspoken. Over the past decade, watchdogs have documented a rise in racist incidents and hostility toward people perceived as non-European. The European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA, reports that people of African descent in Poland experience some of the highest levels of harassment in public spaces in the EU. Yet, reporting rates remain low due to distrust in authorities. When people don't report, numbers look better on paper. Reality doesn't improve. Street-level experiences are often described as tense rather than explosive. Verbal abuse, staring, and "go back to where you came from" comments come up repeatedly in expat testimonies. One black resident told The Guardian, "People assume I'm either illegal or temporary. Nobody imagines I might be here to stay." That presumption alone impacts how you're treated at work, in housing, and even in regular discussions. Housing is a recurring problem. Quote, "Migrants and black residents report landlords refusing rentals outright or demanding higher deposits." A Nigerian professional interviewed by Al Jazeera said, "The apartment was available until they met me. After that, it gone." It's not screaming discrimination. It's courteous rejection with no explanation. Workplaces aren't immune either. Quote, "While Poland actively recruits foreign labor, many black professionals report being stuck below their qualifications." According to FRA data, people of African descent across Central Europe are significantly more likely to be overqualified for their jobs. You can be welcomed as labor, but rarely embraced as leadership. Politics doesn't help. Human rights groups have warned that nationalist rhetoric has normalized suspicion toward migrants. Amnesty International has stated that racism and xenophobia are increasingly visible in public discourse, with minorities often portrayed as threats rather than contributors. That framing trickles down into daily interactions, whether people admit it or not. Poland isn't a war zone. It's safe to visit, easy to navigate, comfortable for a few days. But living there as a black person often means existing on the margins, watched, questioned, and quietly excluded from full participation. You're allowed to pass through. Putting down roots is where the resistance starts. Number 4, Russia. Russia can feel deceptively manageable at first glance. Tourists stick to well-policed city centers, admire grand architecture, ride efficient metros, and leave with stories about how misunderstood the place is. For short visits, especially in major cities, things can feel orderly and even welcoming. But living in Russia as a black person means stepping into a far harsher reality, one shaped by xenophobia, weak legal protections, and a political climate that does not reward difference. Human rights organizations have documented this for years. Human Rights Watch has repeatedly warned that racism and violent harassment against people perceived as foreign remains a serious problem in Russia. Particularly for people of African descent, hate crimes may rise and fall statistically, but accountability remains inconsistent, and victims often report little faith in police protection. A black student interviewed by The Guardian described daily life bluntly. "You get used to being stared at. You get used to comments. What you never get used to is knowing no one will help if it turns serious." That sense of vulnerability is a constant undercurrent. Not always visible, but always present. Public harassment is not uncommon. Reports of racial slurs, intimidation, and even physical attacks appear regularly in independent media. One Cameroonian resident told Reuters, "People think you don't belong here, and some feel entitled to remind you of that." Quote, "When harassment happens, legal remedies are limited and cases involving racial motivation are rarely pursued aggressively." Employment and housing add another layer of difficulty. Black residents and migrants report being steered into low-paying roles regardless of education, while landlords often refuse rentals outright. Russia has no comprehensive anti-discrimination law covering race and housing and employment, which means bias is easy to practice and hard to challenge. Then there's the broader political and security context. In times of tension, migrants and visible minorities often become convenient targets. Amnesty International has noted that xenophobic rhetoric and nationalist narratives have contributed to an environment where minorities face heightened risk. When the state emphasizes conformity and loyalty, being visibly different becomes a liability. To be clear, Russia is not uniformly dangerous for every black person, and experiences vary widely. Some manage to build lives, careers, and communities. But those successes often come despite the system, not because of it. Russia can host you briefly without incident. Living there long-term, however, often means navigating harassment with limited protection, social hostility with few allies, and a legal system that rarely prioritizes your safety. You're allowed to visit. Belonging, on the other hand, is another matter entirely. Number 3, China. China can feel incredibly welcoming at first. Big cities hum with opportunity. Infrastructure works like clockwork, and visitors are often treated with a mix of curiosity and courtesy. As a tourist or short-term business guest, life can feel smooth, modern, and impressively organized. But living there long-term as a black person is where the experience often shifts. Sometimes subtly, sometimes very publicly. The most visible breaking point came during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Africans in Guangzhou were suddenly evicted from apartments, denied hotel rooms, and refused service at restaurants. Videos and photos went viral. One Uganda national told the New York Times, "We were treated like the virus itself." China's government denied systemic wrongdoing, but the damage was done not just reputationally, but personally, for thousands of black residents who realized how fragile their acceptance really was. Even outside crisis moments, black residents report ongoing social discrimination. Being stared at isn't occasional, it's routine. Being photographed without consent isn't rare, it's expected. A Nigerian businessman told BBC Africa, "People touch your skin, your hair, take pictures. At first, it's humorous. Then you realize you're not being seen as normal." Quote, "That constant othering turns everyday errands into emotional labor. Workplaces can be just as complicated. Black professionals report being hired for visibility rather than advancement. Valued as marketing symbols, English teachers are foreign faces, but often blocked from leadership roles." According to research cited by Human Rights Watch, racial stereotypes about blackness persist widely in Chinese media and education, reinforcing bias that spills into hiring and promotion decisions. Housing adds another layer. Landlords have been known to refuse rentals to Africans outright, sometimes citing pressure from neighbors or local authorities. During COVID, many black residents learned that leases, visas, and local registration offered little protection when social panic kicked in. Legal remedies exist, but enforcement is inconsistent, and challenging discrimination as a foreigner can be risky. What makes China particularly difficult is the absence of open dialogue. Racism is often framed as a misunderstanding or denied altogether. One Kenyan student told Alizar, "They say racism doesn't exist here, but they live it with you every day." When an issue officially doesn't exist, fixing it becomes extremely impossible. China is safe to visit, efficient, intriguing, full with potential on paper. But living there as a black person typically means navigating conditional acceptance. Welcome during good times, exposed during difficult ones. You're invited to participate, but rarely to belong. Quote. Number 2, South Korea. South Korea knows how to impress. Everything works, everything's fast, and everything looks curated for visitors. As a tourist, it's clean, safe, efficient, and endlessly photogenic. You eat well, move freely, and feel a reassuring sense of order. Short trips are smooth. The problems don't usually show up at immigration. They show up after you try to settle in. For black residents, life in South Korea is often defined by social friction rather than outright danger. The issue isn't constant hostility. It's constant othering. Studies and expat testimony consistently point to microaggressions, stereotyping, and social exclusion that make long-term life emotionally exhausting. According to a 2020 survey by the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, foreigners of African descent reported higher levels of discrimination than most other migrant groups, particularly in housing and employment. Housing is one of the first reality checks. Black expats routinely report being turned away from apartments with no explanation. A black English teacher interviewed by Alizar said, "The landlord told my recruiter, no Africans. That was it. No discussion. It's legal enough to happen discreetly, common enough to be normalized, and tough to resist without permanent residency or fluent Korean." Workplaces bring their own constraints. Black professionals are often hailed as novelty, notably in entertainment, sports, or English teaching, but rarely fast-tracked into leadership or long-term stability. One Nigerian expat told the Korea Times they want variety on posters, not in decision-making. That ceiling isn't always evident, but you feel it when promotions stagnate or contracts silently stop renewing. Then there's daily existence. Staring is frequent. Touching hair without permission still happens. Comments about skin color are often phrased as curiosity. A black American resident told BBC World Service, "They don't think they're being racist, but you're constantly reminded you're different. That reminder shows up on buses, in cafes, and sometimes from strangers who feel entitled to commentary. South Korea does not have comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation covering race across all sectors, something Human Rights Watch has repeatedly criticized. Without strong legal backing, bias becomes a social issue rather than a solvable one, and social issues tend to linger. To be fair, younger Koreans are more globally exposed and attitudes are slowly shifting. Many Black residents build strong communities and meaningful lives, but that often happens within expat bubbles, not because the broader system makes space. South Korea is safe to visit, easy to enjoy, hard to argue with on a postcard. Living there as a Black person though often means negotiating acceptance daily, not through violence or chaos, but through quiet barriers that never quite disappear. Number 1, Japan. Japan is the country that confuses people the most on this list, and honestly, that's why it sits here at number 1. Everything works. Trains arrive on time, streets are clean, violent crime is low. As a visitor, Japan feels almost unreal in how safe, polite, and efficient daily life can be. You can walk at night, explore freely, and enjoy one of the most organized societies on Earth. On the surface, it feels like the definition of stability. But living in Japan as a Black person introduces a quieter, more complicated reality, one built less on danger and more on exclusion that never quite goes away. Let's address the contradiction head-on. In my previous video, 10 countries you should move to if America no longer works for you as a Black person. Japan appeared for a reason, and that reason still stands. Japan offers safety, infrastructure, healthcare access, and economic order that many people are genuinely seeking. For some Black expats, especially professionals, students, or entrepreneurs with strong financial footing, Japan can work. What puts Japan on this list is not chaos, it's constraint. Japan has no comprehensive national law that explicitly bans racial discrimination across housing, employment, and public accommodations. Human Rights Watch has pointed out that Japan lacks an effective legal framework to prohibit racial discrimination, leaving many victims with no clear path for recourse. When discrimination happens, it's often legal, quiet, and politely enforced. Housing is where many Black residents feel it first. No foreigners signs still appear. Sometimes openly, sometimes coded. A Black resident told the New York Times the apartment was perfect until they saw me. Then suddenly it wasn't available anymore. No argument, no appeal, just a closed door and a smile. Social life can feel equally distant. Japan is famously polite, but politeness is not the same as inclusion. Black residents often describe being treated as permanent outsiders regardless of language ability or years lived in the country. One African American expat told BBC World Service, "You can live here 20 years, speak Japanese fluently, and still be asked when you're going home." Quote. Then there's stereotyping. Blackness in Japan is often filtered through media caricatures or limited exposure. Being stared at, photographed, or commented on isn't rare, it's routine. A Nigerian resident interviewed by Al Jazeera said, "They don't hate you. They just don't perceive you as normal." That distinction matters because it shapes how deeply you're allowed to integrate. Quote. And yet, this is what makes Japan complex. Many Black people still choose it and thrive within certain lanes. Stable employment, strong personal boundaries, and expat communities can buffer the isolation. Japan doesn't try to break you. It simply doesn't bend for you either. So, Japan earns this spot not because it's unsafe, hostile, or unlivable, but because long-term belonging is not built into the system. You can visit comfortably. You can even live well, but feeling fully accepted. That's not guaranteed no matter how long you stay. If this video challenged your assumptions, that's the point. Like the video, subscribe, and check out my other deep dive travel and relocation breakdowns on the channel. Because the truth about living abroad is always more complicated than the brochure.